If you've ever driven alone on a deserted road at night, you know how deafening silence can be. But I never imagined that a simple trip through the Mojave Desert would turn my life into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. This isn't just a road story, it's a warning. It was 2017, and I was driving my truck in the early hours of morning, crossing the Mojave Desert. There were no lights on the road, no other vehicles, just the constant hum of the engine and the absolute silence of the desert. My headlights were dim, something I had always postponed fixing, and I could barely see ahead. It was like driving through a tunnel of infinite darkness. As I moved forward, I felt a growing unease, like I was being watched. But I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Or was it? Suddenly, I saw something on the road, a faint glimmer, then the outline of a car stopped, right in the middle of the lane. What was strange wasn't just the absurd position of the vehicle, but the fact that the passenger door was wide open. My heart raced. It was like a scene from a horror movie. I slammed on the brakes, and my truck screeched to a halt just a few meters from the car. The silence returned, even more oppressive. I decided to step out and investigate. The car was a newer model, a red Ford Fusion. As I got closer, I realized there was no one inside. I checked the back seat, looked underneath the car. Nothing. The only thing that stood out was a strange smell in the air, something metallic and heavy. Suddenly, I felt like I was being watched. My gut was screaming at me to get back in the truck, but curiosity got the better of me. What was going on here? Why would a car be left like this in the middle of a deserted road? I decided to open the trunk. It was locked. I grabbed the key from the ignition, and after some effort, I managed to unlock it. But when I opened it, I almost regretted my decision. Inside were 3 tightly tied black garbage bags with dark stains around them. My heart felt like it was about to leap out of my chest. Before I could do anything, a sound shattered the silence. A gunshot. The noise thundered through the desert, echoing in the emptiness. I turned so quickly that I smacked my head against the car roof. That's when I saw him. A man emerging from the darkness, walking straight toward me. He was short and stocky, wearing a dirty jumpsuit and boots that looked caked in dust. In his left hand, he held a shovel. In his right, a gun pointed downward. "Hey," he shouted, his voice deep and gravelly. He sounded more desperate than aggressive, but that didn't calm me down in the slightest. Without a second thought, I bolted toward the truck. I could hear his footsteps behind me, each one quicker than the last. I jumped into the cab and started the engine with trembling hands. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't start, but finally, it roared to life. As I sped away, I glanced back and saw the man standing in the middle of the road. He didn't fire his gun, but he stood there staring at me with an expression that was a strange mix of frustration and fear. I thought I was safe, but a few minutes later, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. He was coming after me, honking and speeding up. My blood ran cold. He was desperate to catch up to me, and I had no intention of finding out why. I called the police as I drove, trying to stay calm. Luckily, after a few minutes of absolute tension, I saw the flashing lights of a police car ahead. As soon as the man realized the cops were there, he made a sharp turn off the road and disappeared into the desert, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust. The police never found the man or the car. They said they'd conduct a search, but I never got any answers. To this day, I still wonder what was in those bags and why he seemed so desperate. Maybe he was hiding something unspeakable. Maybe he was just a disturbed man. But one thing is certain, I've never driven alone on deserted roads at night again. And you, what would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. It was a cold November night, and I was heading to a small town in the countryside after a long day of work. The clock struck 3 in the morning when I entered a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, crossing the mountains of Colorado. My truck's headlights cut through the darkness, but it seemed like the road would never end. The radio was broken, and the only company was the sound of the engine and the monotonous rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. Time felt suspended, as if the world around me had been swallowed by the night. I've always preferred driving at night. The solitude it offered gave me a sense of peace. But that night, something felt off. Suddenly, I saw something strange in my rearview mirror, a faint point of light emerging behind me. I knew there were no more towns nearby. There shouldn't be anyone on this road at this hour. The light was approaching quickly, but what unsettled me more was that it wasn't coming from a car. It was more like a lantern, floating a few feet above the ground, swaying from side to side. I tried not to think too much about it and sped up, wanting to leave that uncomfortable feeling behind. But the light kept following, always at the same distance. When I looked in the mirror, it seemed even closer. In a panic, I quickly glanced to the sides of the road, but all I could see was the vastness of the mountains and the dense underbrush, an almost palpable darkness. Then I saw the sign, "Next rest area, 10 miles. It wasn't far, and I thought I could stop there and wait for whatever it was to disappear. With my heart pounding, I kept driving, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. I reached the rest area and, with trembling hands, parked the truck. The light was still there, floating, now just behind my truck, only a few feet away. I didn't know what was happening, but fear was taking over. There was no one in sight, just the solitary lantern, swaying slowly as if it were watching me. I decided to get out of the truck. Maybe, somehow, I could figure out what was going on. As soon as my foot hit the ground, a chill ran through my body, colder than any wind. The lantern kept swaying, moving in circles. Then, as if in response to my fear, the light began moving toward an old roadside restroom that was there, isolated. A terrible feeling washed over me, but curiosity was stronger. I followed the light, as if it were trying to guide me. When I entered the restroom, the light was there, hovering by the door. The place was dark, except for that light, now hovering over one of the sinks. I didn't know what to do, so I hesitantly stepped closer. That's when I heard a whisper, soft, almost inaudible, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "Are you lost?" I froze. There was no one there. The light began to shine brighter, and the sound of footsteps approached, but no one could be seen. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I turned to leave, but as the door slammed behind me, a deep silence took over. The truck's headlights flickered a few times and then went out, as if something was blocking them from working. I felt a presence behind me, but I didn't dare look. The light, the lantern, was now right in front of me, floating, and I was paralyzed, unable to take a single step. "You will never leave here," said the voice, now clear and echoing, as if coming from the very walls around me. Before I could react, I heard something dragging on the floor, and the restroom door swung open with a crash. I turned around and saw a figure, skeletal and distorted, with empty eyes that reflected what little light remained. The lantern was embedded in its chest, swaying with its slow movements. With a strength I didn't know I had, I ran back to the truck and climbed in, almost tearing the door off. The truck's engine started with difficulty, but as I heard the voice on the road, I knew I was being followed. The light was now brighter than ever, like a ship's beacon, always in front of me, guiding me into the unknown. I kept driving until dawn, fear consuming me every second. When I reached the town, I tried to tell what had happened, but no one believed me. They said the road had a history of disappearances and legends of lost souls wandering there. I never went back to that road, and to this day, whenever I see a distant light in the dark, I wonder, am I still being followed by that lantern that never goes out? It was a cold winter night with no moon when I found myself driving alone on Highway 62 in rural Kansas. The sound of the tires scraping against the snow echoed in my ears, and the road, illuminated only by my car's headlights, seemed endless. I was heading home after a long business trip, and as always, I enjoyed the solitude of the road. But that night, something felt different. The snow had begun to fall suddenly, making visibility difficult. I couldn't see much ahead, just a thick mist that seemed to swallow everything. After hours of driving with nothing but white fog and slippery asphalt, I started noticing something in my rearview mirror. It wasn't a car, but a shadow. At first, I thought it was just the effect of the fog, but soon the shadow became clearer. A dark, undefined shape, a human figure, coming closer quickly. My heart started to race. I was alone on the road, but that figure seemed to be following me, no matter how fast I drove. The tension built as the figure drew nearer. I glanced at the mirror, and that's when I saw it. A man was walking along the edge of the road unhurriedly, taking long, slow steps, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat and hood. His skin was pale, and his eyes were hollow and dark, as if they were empty. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no reason for anyone to be out there on that freezing night, miles away from any town. But what was stranger still was that he seemed to be watching me directly through the rearview mirror, as if he knew exactly where I was. I quickly looked away and sped up, wanting to leave the man behind. But with every mile, he seemed to be getting closer. I looked back again, and he was now only a few feet behind my car. Panic took over. I knew I was on a deserted road, and there was no sign of life for miles. Suddenly, a crazy thought crossed my mind. What if this man needed help? What if he was lost? But at the same time, an eerie sense of danger washed over me. Something told me I shouldn't stop. When I was about to take the next exit off the road, a bright light shone in my rearview mirror. It was a car coming up quickly behind me. I thought it would pass me, but to my surprise, it stopped abruptly right behind my car. A soft tap on the rear bumper made me flinch. Startled, I looked outside the window and saw a shadowy figure inside the car. The passenger window slowly rolled down, and the voice that came out wasn't human. It was low, almost a whisper. "Did you see him?" the voice asked, raspy and full of desperation. I froze, not knowing how to answer. The figure was just a few feet away, its eyes fixed on me, but I didn't know if it was talking to the man on the road or something much darker. The voice seemed to come from all directions, as if it was surrounding me. "Don't let him in," the voice said, before the window slammed shut and the car disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I didn't know what to do. The man was still there, now closer than ever, his steps no longer echoing along the empty road, but drawing near to my car. I looked around for a safe place to stop, but there was nothing but snow and more snow. In a flash of impulse, I tore off down the road, accelerating as fast as I could. The man kept walking, his feet not touching the ground, as if he were floating above the snow. My headlights illuminated his face, and I saw his eyes. They were completely black, no pupils, no life. A deep, terrifying void. I swerved to the right, trying to escape, but the car lost control on the snow and slid. When I regained control, I looked to the side and saw the figure disappearing into the fog, as if he had never been there. The rest of the journey was a blur of fear and adrenaline. When I finally reached the town, I tried to tell my story to the police, but they didn't believe me. No one else had seen the man. They said he was probably a lost traveler, but I knew the truth. He wasn't an ordinary man. To this day, whenever I pass that road, I feel the weight of that night. And even though I can't see him, I know he's still out there, waiting for his next victim. So, if you ever drive down Highway 62 at night, be careful. Don't take rides from strangers, and most importantly, don't look in the rearview mirror.